and he changed the world. Well, not really.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation, bringing on fans and critics alike to talk about a film that they really want to talk about. There's something that they connect with or something they really remember that resonates with them. And so this episode, I actually put a call out on Twitter saying, hey, we've already covered some great films in 1999, The Matrix, American Beauty, Office Space, and what else should we talk about? And Jamie Williams of Think McFly Think, one of the founders of that site, he responded with the film that we'll talk about this episode, which we'll reveal in a minute. But Jamie, welcome to the show.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. Happy to have you on. So we were talking a little bit before I hit record about 1999 and what a pivotal year this was for movies. I mean, some of the films that I mentioned already, and then you have huge box office hits like The Sixth Sense that also came out the same year. Films like Being John Malkovich. So, what is it about 1999 that you think crystallizes that as one of the best years in cinema?
Well, for me, I mean, I can only speak from my perspective. I was 15, and that was the year when I'm full-fledged into movies. It's that case where. And this is one of those things that people don't remember now is pre-Columbine, it was a lot easier to get into an R-rated movie because I had no problem getting into The Matrix opening weekend. And, but when that tragedy happened 2 weeks later, it became impossible. And I remember that fall trying to get into Sleepy Hollow in the exact same theater, my home theater, the exact same manager who I'm friends with to this day, even though I don't live there anymore. I couldn't get in. And he specifically told me, "You're too young. Sorry." It's just a different time now. I think 1999 might have been the last truly spectacular year at the movies. We've had some really solid ones, even some great ones, but like a spectacular with a capital S year. I can't think of another one. 2004 was pretty great. That might have been the closest one. We just had one recently in 2015 where at the end of the year we were just naming all these amazing movies. And then, of course, fucking Spotlight wins, whatever. But yeah, 1999, man, maybe it's not nostalgia because the movie I picked kind of doesn't hook to nostalgia, frankly.
No, and that was part of why I thought your response to my tweet was so interesting because this is a film that people don't really talk about that much, unfortunately. And as far as Columbine and its impact on cinemas, I think a lot of people forget that The Matrix came out. So the window between The Matrix coming out and Columbine was so small that it was
2 weeks.
Just 2 weeks. And and of course the Matrix kind of bore the brunt of supposedly being the influence that whatever that had as far as the trench coats and all of that and the lobby scene from that film. That was part of the controversy surrounding it, I think, during its theatrical run. But there's so many that we talk about. I mean, Iron Giant I just thought of is also 99. There's a lot of great movies across all genres in 99.
And Phantom Menace. I mean, we are recording this the Monday after Avengers Endgame opened and, had that massive opening weekend, which I don't think will ever be topped. However, I'm going to be honest with you, the hype of the Phantom Menace will never be matched. You cannot, kids today, and I know I just turned 35, I sound like an old geezer. You cannot fathom what it was like leading up to the release of Phantom Menace. That entire 9 window from the moment that first teaser hit in front of in front of Meet Joe Black, actually, in November of 1998 till the opening in May of 99. You cannot match that.
No, it's probably responsible for most of Meet Joe Black's box office now that you mentioned that. But I turned 36 in a couple months, so I was in high school when Phantom Menace came out. So I remember everybody the next Monday after the opening weekend at school, everybody be like, "Oh my God, did you see Star Wars?" And sort of the impact that had having a new Star Wars movie for the first time in 16 years, the first time in our lifetime. And the all the expectations that went into it and how everybody was praising it initially, and then since then,
they loved it initially. They loved it
ripped apart.
It was about halfway through the summer when the tide turned. It was not immediate. When I hear people, I've heard fellow pundits of ours who say, "I knew from the start." I honestly will say to their face, bullshit. It was praised up front. The reception at the time was, no, it's not Star Wars, no, it's not Empire, but it's better than Jedi. That was the initial reaction. I remember this.
Yeah.
And I like Phantom Menace. I still like Phantom Menace. I did the prequels. They're not great, but I got to tell you, we're not talking about them, and you can cut this if you want to. But I'm not going to say I prefer them to the Disney era of Star Wars, but at least there was more originality going on with those movies. Because George Lucas knew, don't play the fan service, that gets you nowhere. That was his reaction when he first saw it. He first saw Force Awakens, and the internet lost their shit and attacked him because he said he thought, I liked it, the actors are pretty good, but it's really fan servicey. All they do is retread the old movies, and they lost their shit. And then it comes out, and guess what? They're like, well, he was right. I say this as someone who did like Force Awakens.
Right. I think, I mean, I have conflicted thoughts on the prequels. I'm actually going to be doing an episode on, I'm going to be doing episodes on pretty much the entire saga throughout the rest of this year. There's a lot to dig into there because, I mean, having grown up with that initial response, like there are elements of the prequels that I love, and there are elements, you know, some of the acting, obviously, and things like that are not so great. But I still think Revenge of the Sith is pretty solid, and I actually kind of prefer that to Return of the Jedi, which I know is a controversial opinion. That was
the other thing, is every time a new movie has been here since Phantom Menace, the reaction has always been, it's the best one since Jedi, or the best one since Empire. Like we heard that was Last Jedi. I did not like Last Jedi. That's a separate podcast. But right. I mean, it was a case where I didn't like it. My lovely wife Anna and I saw it opening day with a packed audience in the state capital of Louisiana, a very meat and potatoes audience. It was packed. They hated it. And I didn't like it. And you know what? Here's the thing. I haven't seen it since. So the movie that we're harping on, it amazes me that this is the hill that people want to die on. That and like the Ghostbusters reboot. It's like, these are the movies that you want to like fight over. Like I would rather fight over something else, like a real movie. No offense. Like those aren't real movies. Like I'd rather debate over, you know, like Salo, or, you know, whether or not that's pornography or not. Like, I would rather have a real debate. Maybe even this movie we're going to talk about, you know, or The Matrix. Let's talk about, you know, whether or not that movie did influence Columbine. Let's have real conversations. But
there's a lot of division right now, and I mean, in as far as the cinema conversation, like that's part of why I like having this podcast, because I bring different people on to talk about different films, so we're not just talking about Marvel, DC, Star Wars every single episode, because that gets monotonous, and it just reaches a certain point where everyone, you know, you like what you like, you know, and if you don't agree with me, then that's fine, whatever, you know, just live your life. It's not a big deal, but everybody I
love nothing more than hearing a different point of view.
Right, okay? Exactly.
My favorite movie of all time, it goes down to 3 movies, but at the end of the day, it's going to be John Borman's Excalibur. And if someone said, I hate that piece of shit, I mean, awesome. Why not? Why do you hate it? I'm curious. What don't you like about it? Like, I don't get all defensive, because the movie's never going to change. You know, it's always going to be the same movie. I think that should be anyone's response.
And I think movies everybody reacts to a movie differently. So it's just with this show, at least, I try and celebrate that rather than be like, well, that's not the correct opinion, which is an oxymoron in and of itself.
Sure.
But yeah, so 1999, I think we can agree that was a very pivotal year in cinema. And unfortunately, of the many films that we're still talking about from that year, one that we're not talking about is this one, which is kind of a good segue into this. So let's listen to a little bit of the trailer for the film we're going to talk about today, Man on the Moon.
Hello, I am Andy.
I want to be the biggest star in the world.
Your act is like amateur hour.
And I'm not like everybody else.
I really like what you did out there.
I'm not a comedian. I don't want to go for cheap laughs.
You shark!
What's wrong with this guy? They detest you.
That means we're a success.
40 million people are watching you every week. Party time for Latka.
Some of us at Saturday Night Live think Andy Kaufman's a comic genius.
Thank you very much.
You just don't respect anything.
You said some pretty inflammatory things.
I'm sorry.
I've always got to be one step ahead of them.
This guy is so obnoxious.
It's good old-fashioned entertainment, George.
Is Andy Kaufman crazy?
I'm just acting crazy.
I'm gonna do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again.
So that was a little bit of the trailer for Man on the Moon from director Milos Forman. So Jamie, why did you want to talk about this particular movie? Like, what is your experience seeing it? Were you a big Jim Carrey fan around this time?
I was a big fan of Jim Carrey. I mean, but it was one of those things that it all sort of came together at once. Going into that Christmas of 1999. And I actually made the mistake of not researching the box office. I'm going off memory here. That was the big one going into that Christmas in terms of the awards hype. Everyone thought because of the pedigree of Milos Forman, who had won several People Academy Awards, 2 for himself, no less, the subject matter, the advanced quote-unquote buzz, Carrey's performance. The talk was about Man on the Moon. And something about it, like I saw the trailer, and I loved it. I was like, I can't wait to see this movie. And I remember it said my obsession into the Andy Kaufman lore, which kind of died out after about 2 years or so. But I remember the pre-release hype. They had like specials on MSNBC. They had a show called Time and Again and Headliners and Legends. They did one of those they did on Andy Kaufman using old clips. There was an Each Hollywood Story Andy Kaufman, which actually predated the production of this movie. So I'd already seen it. And they were playing, Taxi reruns ad nauseum on Nick at Night. And I remember watching like the Mighty Mouse clip with my father, and he chuckled, he laughed, he thought it was very funny. And it's one of those things where a lot of what we do, not everybody, but a lot of us, and I'm one of them, you really get it from your parents. You want to have a bonding experience with your family, with your dad or your mom. And for me, it was the Mighty Mouse moment where my dad started chuckling endlessly, and my dad started watching Taxi, and it got me into the lore. And also the big thing was, the obsession I've had up until recently was it got me into REM, because I remember hearing the song at the end of the trailer going, what is that song? And someone told me, oh, that's from a band called REM. And I remember specifically buying the soundtrack first. So I had not seen the movie. I'd read the reviews, and Entertainment Weekly actually picked it as the best movie of 1999. I bought that year-end issue, which I used to look forward to those religiously as a kid. And when you look back in 1999 as a year, as you said earlier, sir, you're like, that's the movie they picked. There's actually 2 critics. There's Owen Gleiberman and Lisa Schwarzman. And I believe Mr. Gleiberman picked A Man on the Moon as the #1 movie of the year, which, again, it's all about taste. It's not a wrong opinion or a right opinion.
Right.
But it got me into, like, wow, this is the movie. And, like, I remember I visually have it burned in my head, the artwork they used in the article. I remember, and we'll get into this later, presumably, is like the day after the Academy Award nominations were announced, they had a picture of Carrey from Man on the Moon. I think it's the Mighty Mouse moment recreated. And it was New York Post, and had a giant bold letters on the headline, robbed. He was such a consensus to get that Academy, not just a nomination, but an Oscar. They thought, like, he's going to win straight up. Like, there had been so much talk about how possessive, which they certainly downplayed in the press at the time, how he really just got inhabited with his character, and overtly so. And I have opinions on that too. But so I waited 6 months. I missed the theatrical release because the movie bombed. It completely bombed. It did not get any kind of awards. It did not get the attraction we thought it would. It came and went after the holidays. And I got I first saw the VHS, and then like a little bit later the DVD, back when DVD was like just getting into the market. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's funny, and I just got into it all. It influenced a movie that I myself still want to make one day about Andy Kaufman that I won't reveal here, because if I give it away, it'll never get made. That's my attitude about it. So I got really impregnated with the lore of Andy Kaufman, all this stuff. It's funny that I rewatched for this podcast. I haven't seen it since early 2000, maybe around 2001.
Right.
The DVD has been collecting dust in various forms of homes for years since I moved away, my parents moved to Florida. They saved up all my DVDs, which I had boxes and boxes of, and I now have, and I had to go digging for the DVD. And I watched it, and I realized that the tropes of the movie, it's everything that I've come to hate. I hate biopics.
Okay. Yeah.
I think, now, no movie is easy to make. Every movie is hard. But if there's any movie that, in my opinion, is easy to make, it's going to be a biopic.
Oh, yeah.
Because the structure is so there, and we've seen so many examples. Case in point is a $900 million grossing Academy Award-winning blockbuster that came out last fall called Bohemian Rhapsody. Yeah. That was incidentally the worst movie I saw last year. I hated it. I despised that movie. But I remember thinking, this is what Walk the Line was making fun of.
Right.
Walk the Line was not just making fun of these kind of, it was making fun of all of them. You could insert Man on the Moon into that equation. Any biopic. It's so lazily put together. And yet, it's not nostalgia talking, because the flaws in that movie still sting even harder as a 35-year-old as opposed to seeing it as a 16-year-old. I still liked it. And a lot of that is because Jim Carrey's performance.
Yeah.
But it's that yin yang thing that we'll get to later about what he put people through for the sake of art.
Oh yeah. We'll definitely get to that. No, it sounds like you and I had very similar lives in 1999. Because, well, first of all, I was a huge fan of Jim Carrey. When I rebranded this podcast with the specific focus of bringing in different guests to talk about different movies, the first one I talked about was I was actually the subject of the episode, more or less, and I chose to talk about Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, because that was a huge, big, that was a big formative movie for me as a child. That and The Mask and Dumb and Dumber, not as much, but and then Liar Liar and all that stuff. So I was fully in the bag for anything Jim Carrey at this point in the 90s. And this was the year after he got the Golden Globe for Truman Show, which a lot of people think he should have been nominated for that as well. So I remember really following all of that and hoping he was going to get a nomination for this. And of course, I wasn't super well versed on Andy Kaufman at this point either, because that was obviously before our time. Though I was aware of Taxi and things like that. And I was reading Entertainment Weekly. That's what I'm saying. We were very, very much in the same. I think I might still have some of those year-end issues when they were talking about the best of every year. So yeah, me too. Those are great. And then it came out December 22nd, 1999, and I actually brought up the Box Office Mojo. It only made $34 million domestically, and only additional 12 overseas, with a budget of $82 million apparently. And I'm sure a lot of that is Jim Carrey and the cast. Movie. Yeah,
that was paying a lot of people. That was paying some top talent. Carrey, DeVito's producing fee, Milos Forman, who was a gun for hire. Larry Karaszewski and Scott Alexander wrote it. They were coming very hot off of People versus Larry Flint, which this turned out to be a reunion, and it could have been even more when you hear the stories about how Ed Norton was kind of the guy they really wanted.
That would have been interesting.
The thing about it is that when I think back in the movie and I rewatched it, it dawned on me that it's just I really respect Milos Forman, and he is an honest to God great with a capital G director. He was the wrong guy for Man on the Moon. Because they said he was a gun. Bob Zamuda said he was a gun for hire. He was brought in, early on, but the movie was in development. They were already writing it, and they brought him on. He was not there from the start, and he just seems like the wrong guy. And I'm even thinking in the back of my mind, who circa 1998, 99 could have taken that job? And I sit there going, and it's a terrible choice, but David Lynch.
That would have been, that would have made more sense, because it feels like they brought Milos Forman into this because of his Oscar pedigree, thinking, oh, this will be a huge Oscar player with him on a biopic of a noted comedian. But yeah, it doesn't really feel like necessarily the best fit of director and material.
It didn't feel like I didn't feel his stamp at all. It just didn't feel distinguishedly him. And to hear how the casting thing went on, which is basically he could not make up his mind. And, if I've made short films, I think we all have, you have to be very committed, and you are the ultimate decider as the director. You are in charge for a reason. And if you can't make up your mind who you're going to cast in the lead role, I think it's very troubling. And the story goes that he could not decide between Jim Carrey and Ed Norton, even though he really liked Ed Norton. They were the only two actors who were willing to screen test. That was his way of trying to get out of trouble with all the other actors in Hollywood who openly said to him, I want to play Andy Kaufman. I'm the guy. He came up with the scheme supposedly, okay, submit a screen test. And nobody did, except for Jim Carrey and Ed Norton. They were the only two guys who were secure enough in their own acting abilities to say, fuck it, I'll make a screen test. And he still couldn't make up his mind. And basically let the studio decide. Who do you think the studio's going to Who do you think the studio's going to pick? The $20 million actor or the character actor who's just at this point just got a surprise Oscar nomination, which, by the way, I would put dollars to donuts. Ed Norton's nomination for American History X is the performance that bumped Jim Carrey out of getting nominated for Truman Show. I can't prove that. That's my theory.
That makes sense. That makes sense. American History X does feel like
who are we gonna pick? Studio, and again, I can understand an executive's thought process. I get it. Let's go with the sure bet because this is weird subject matter. Kaufman's been dead for at this point 15 years. No one remembers him. Obviously, we're going to do the hype factor and bring him back into the eye. But it's easier with Jim Carrey, who is more accessible. And the only thing people knew Ed Norton for at this point was Primal Fear. Yeah, Primal Fear and...
Well, Fight Club was the same year, but I don't... not when they were casting it. That hadn't been released yet, so...
Hadn't been released yet. Yeah, I think he had just finished Fight Club. He had a lot of clout on that movie, more so than even David Fincher. Because Fincher was coming off The Game, which was a giant bomb. Mm-hmm. So the attitude was, well, he's done. And basically, Norton had the clout because of American History X. And, Brad Pitt was coming off a bomb, too. Everyone forgets. He had a period in the late 90s where Brad was just delivering one bomb after another, including the aforementioned Meet Joe Black. And Ed Norton actually basically somehow, because he was, I remember why. Because he had basically taken over American History X in post-production. So they allowed him to have final cut, and he said, no, pass it. That's the story I heard. And I'm going to believe it. Well, that just sounds crazy.
With everything we've heard, and that's been the story coming out of multiple Edward Norton productions, that he's really hands-on and has a tendency to want to just redo things. I mean, that's largely why it seems like he's not in the Marvel Cinematic Universe after one film.
Well, he's not in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I know this. I heard from this. Marvel had enough of his nonsense. Yeah. He refused to promote the Hulk. Mm-hmm. Same summer as Iron Man, when Robert Downey Jr. was shaking every hand and kissing every baby. He was running for office practically.
Basically.
And Norton is refusing to sell the movie. So they were quickly the story I heard is that one of the first decisions made on the Avengers, when they settled on Whedon, even before they settled on Whedon, they said, he's not coming back. He is fired. So let's start. Once we get a director, we will start thinking about who is going to play Bruce Banner now. That's the story I heard.
Yeah, now we're really digressing, but yeah, it's that early time for the MCU. They were obviously, with Terrence Howard also switching out, they became much more selective in who they were going to put in these roles that people were going to play for a decade and more at this point. So getting back on track to Man on the Moon, what do you think about, I guess it makes more sense to let's just talk about Jim Carrey. This feels like it should just be a larger discussion on the movie, but also Jim Carrey's performance. And then that can kind of loop in with Jim and Andy, that I know we wanted to talk about that documentary film as well, what's weird,
I think that the performance is still dynamite. I can't take my head off of how good he is in that role. I mean, there's a really funny YouTube video saying Jim Carrey's an asshole that lays a very good argument as to why he was wrong for Andy Kaufman, about how, when you do a side-by-side comparison to, again, the Mighty Mouse bit, Andy Kaufman played the role very straight. He's not making many facial gestures, and yet you look at Jim Carrey's recreation of it, and he's got the rubber face. And when he's doing here I come, it's like he's just going all out with the facial expressions. And that's the one moment in Man on the Moon where you sort of see Jim Carrey kind of oozing out of that performance, like Jim Carrey, in the same way that in the Truman Show, the one moment you can see Jim Carrey kind of squeaking out is during the scene when he's in the car with his quote unquote wife.
I knew exactly what scene you were going to reference. I was waiting for it.
That's the moment. And it was almost like Peter Weir was like, all right, I have to put one of these in because there's so many takes. He probably did that for every scene, at least one take, where he let his isms seep through. And that was the one moment where you could sort of justify it because he is losing his mind.
Right.
But, that's the moment, Man on the Moon, where you sort of see Jim Carrey. It's weird because after I first saw it as a kid, I then looked at I was so hypnotized by Jim Carrey's Andy Kaufman that I had to remind myself, he doesn't look a thing like Andy Kaufman. This is the real Andy Kaufman who looks more like an average guy, kind of doughy faced. He looks like the kind of guy who, as he did in real life, could walk down a street and go unnoticed. I don't feel that way about Jim Carrey. Even in his lesser known days, he just stands out. There's something about him. You just look at him. And I at the time I thought it was the best performance of his career. And hindsight being what it is, in additional film work, I would say, well, it's just top 3. I can't imagine him ever giving a better performance than Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
I think as far as complex performances, as far as dramatic performances, I think it's this, Eternal Sunshine, and I guess Truman Show. Those are probably his 3 best kind of most dramatic performances. As far as that's obviously not taking away the work he does in other films like Liar Liar, but that's comedic performance. So it feels like a totally different category. There's a lot more richness to those other 3 that we mentioned. And I agree with you. I think this is either it's certain, maybe not his best performance, but it's certainly in the conversation. And I think part of that is because of the level of commitment that he brings to the role. I mean, as we see in Jim and Andy, he completely refused to be called Jim Carrey. He was either Andy or Tony Clifton throughout the entire production. They actually have the same birthday, Andy Kaufman and Jim Carrey, which is crazy.
That was weird. That's weird. I have mixed feelings about that because I think you can, his story is that, he was channeled by Andy, and that caused him to do these things. And you watch the documentary, and and I've listened to other interviews with Bob Zmuda on other podcasts, and he was very open about saying Jim Carrey was pretty much Jim off set. He was fine. I'm just going to say it right now. I think Jim Carrey was an asshole. The movie, the documentary Jim and Andy, honestly made me this close to make me retroactively hate Man on the Moon. This close. I'm doing visually with my fingers right now. And it didn't, thank God, but it did make me, frankly, despise Jim Carrey as a person, because there is no justification for that kind of thing. And, what has been lost in the shuffle of the Andy Kaufman isms over the years, and what a trendsetter he was for this kind of performance art, was, here's the difference. Andy Kaufman let people know who needed to know ahead of time. He didn't just grab anybody. He actually orchestrated this stuff very carefully, and he knew, because he's a decent human being, they're going to hate me. I can't do this. That's a person. I can't. So I've got to work this stuff out with him. He was very meticulous. David Letterman always knew what he was going to do. The stuff with Jerry Lawler, which they only actually revealed right before the movie came out, because they were actually, to their credit, they were very much keeping that secret even after he died. Mm-hmm. Like Jerry Lawler was always involved. But what you kept constantly hearing was, about the Jim Carrey stuff, was Andy was never that way. Jim Carrey was just a jerk. Even like the justification is I was possessed by Andy Kaufman, but didn't you see him talking to the real life Bob Zmuda? If that's the case, then why wasn't he talking to Paul Giamatti that way? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Right.
You see Jim and Andy, and Paul Giamatti, I don't even think he says a word in the documentary. I don't think he does. He might say something in there. There's a bit where he's orchestrating a fake fight with the actor who's playing his father, which is weird, by the way. It's bizarre. And you just see Paul Giamatti sitting there, and he's holding his hand to his mouth, and it's like, I'm not saying anything. The best thing to do is to say nothing. Because you think, he's sitting there thinking, what a fucking weirdo. Like, what was the point of this? You could have given just a greater performance without doing all this crap. Mm-hmm. Without the crap about meeting Andy Kaufman's daughter in real life and having a private conversation with her. A woman who, by the way, he never got to meet. That's the tragedy. He never was able to find her. He couldn't find her. It was, people say, well, how couldn't he find her? Well, I mean, it's pre-internet. It's a little easier back now to find someone. He couldn't have been, even with his success. Having these scenes with his real life family and having these like them loving up on him. Plus the Clifton crap. It's creepy.
Yeah, it is.
Really it bothers I mean, there's literally a moment in the documentary where Milos is begging him, Jim, stop, please.
I remember that.
And Jim Carrey's answer was basically, if you don't let me do it, I'm going to give a shitty performance. Mm-hmm. He says this in the documentary. And I will say, of all things, and the documentary is pretty great. I'm not taking away from this.
Right.
From any of that. I say that I can really miss Jim Carrey for doing this, and I stand by what I just said. However, and this is not an oxymoron, what I'm about to say, I also have respect for the man, because he had no problem putting this footage out and saying, I did this. I got to hand it to him. That's ballsy, man.
I think in a way this was his way of being like owning up to how much of an asshole he was on the set of this movie, and putting it out there, and meanwhile also kind of illustrating the meta textualness of him kind of channeling Andy. And yeah, there is that difference that you mentioned, but he related to a lot of Andy's, at least is portrayed in this movie, his drive to try and craft a very particular relationship with his audience, to feel like he's always on. I mean, you see Jim Carrey throughout pretty much all the 90s into probably the early 2000s, and anytime he was on an award show, he was acting crazy, whatever, and that was
expected of him.
Yeah, because he had to live up to the image of, he couldn't just be a guy. He had to be, the rubber face, like Ace Ventura. Yeah, he couldn't just be Jim. Exactly. So
the one I remember the most, I think it was the Academy Awards or the Golden Globes. It was pre-Truman Show, and he was making a joke about how they're using dead celebrities to recreate footage of dead celebrities to sell products at the time. And he said, well, we're going to get to the point where we're going to say, who wants cheese? And he bends over and talks out of his ass. I do. That's the one I remember. I wish I remember what it was. That was really funny. It's a weird feeling about that movie, because I actually think I heard about Jim and Andy in terms of review. Someone said it was a better Andy Kaufman movie than Man on the Moon. That's actually kind of true.
Yeah,
I like Man on the Moon. It kind of is, actually. But look, there's about Man on the Moon that do work really well outside of Jim Carrey. There are some wonderfully put together scenes. I mentioned the REM score. I mean, the REM, their score is pretty good. It's weird that whoever made the decision, hey, let's let them score the movie. It's pretty good. I had the soundtrack. I remember those music cues very vividly. In fact, there's a bit in the soundtrack where Michael Stipe, Andy, quote unquote, and Tony Clifton sing "It's a Friendly World," which is in the movie, like them singing that at his funeral. But it's not in the actual movie. But I remember that bit. In fact, I re-listened it on YouTube 2 days ago before this recording. It brought back all the memories of being 15 and 16. I'm like, oh my God, I used to listen to this all the time, and realizing how much older I am. There's the whole Boy Who Cried Wolf narrative, which is all throughout the movie, which is, again, in real life, that did not happen. I know they're going to make changes for dramatic effect, what really happened, as opposed to what didn't in a movie. In real life, his family always knew what he was doing. In the movie, it suggests his family never really knew what he was doing. They knew the whole time. They always knew, oh, that's just Andy being silly. We'll go along with it. But he always told his mom, Dad, I'm going to be wrestling. I'm going to break my neck. Don't be worried.
They show him a lot, like wrapping people into his pranks, usually Bob or Jerry Lawler, things like that. But it's unlike a traditional biopic, his family is really only shown like small spurts. And I like that the fact that the film directly references exactly what you said, that Andy starts the movie in character doing his foreign man character.
That was great.
Oh, I love that. So that's one of the things I remember the most about this. I remember the opening, because it's like, so I had them take out all of the baloney and all of the stuff that they added in to dramatize my story, basically. In fact, this is the end of the movie, and then runs the credits and everything. All that, we're like already acknowledging, hey, this is not going to be this is not a documentary about Andy Kaufman. This is a dramatization. So we're going to make changes along the way. So don't give us too much shit about that. And acknowledging that up front, I think was a really kind of smart and clever way to do it, and framing it sort of as an Andy Kaufman-esque prank just right from the get-go.
Yeah, and then wrapping around to it being, one presumes the video that they're watching at his funeral. That's what they were watching.
Right.
Wouldn't surprise me, because we don't know the details. But that's another fascinating thing. Like the reveal of, it's very touching. I will admit, it is very touching, the reveal at the end when, he's been had. He got the last joke. The last joke was on him, about the cancerous tumor, being taken out of him. And then it, just fades in, and there's his corpse. It's very, very moving. I mean, there's the movie conventions that definitely annoyed me at the time and still annoy me now. Everyone was at his funeral, including the people who he was an ass to. Again, within the movie context. In real life, I can imagine Jerry Lawler. I don't know if Jerry Lawler was there. Supposedly the Taxi cast was not at his funeral. and Bob Zmuda, and you can really have to put an asterisk there because Zmuda, God love him, has been feeding into the myth of Andy Kaufman in the now 35 years since he died. And some of the things he says, like, crap. You're just like, dude, this is nonsense. There have been other people who call out. Like, even with the Tony Clifton stuff, he told people all the time, hey, there's an interview with, I think it's Sam Simon, who wrote for Taxi and famously developed The Simpsons, and said that literally Andy was in Tony Clifton outfit and told him, don't worry, it's me. Like, the movie never said that. Like, the movie just assumes that it's all. There were things I didn't like about the movie. I actually think the last shot kind of bothered me the more I think about it, because it tries to play into the now legendary, maybe he's not really dead,
which
sort of
they
attitude.
reference it a few times throughout the movie. He's like, short of like, I don't know, faking my own death, what could I do?
Right.
And they mention, I think 2 or 3 times throughout the course of the movie, kind of floating that idea out there and planting that seed for that sort of, I guess, open-ended question mark of an ending.
Well, it's weird to me because the movie in the last act, 20 minutes, goes out of its way to say he has cancer. This is for real. It turns into The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and we go through everything. We go through all the stuff with all the chemo stuff. He's dead. Oh, by the way, maybe he's not really dead. The last 2 seconds.
Right.
That annoyed me. I was like, you need to stick the landing. You need to really effectively plant those seeds if you're going to play that card, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, again, like, I didn't mind that they moved stuff around in real life. I knew even as a 15-year-old that the famous Carnegie Hall performance was something he did actually early into his career. In fact, that got him noticed at the time. That's right when Taxi took off. I am amused by the film's notion that Taxi was a crap show, when in fact Taxi was, at the time, one of the most critically acclaimed shows that ever aired on television.
Right.
It was a big hit for like the first 2 seasons, and it kind of petered out. But it was, like, it kept winning every year. I think it was one of those shows that kept winning all the time at the Emmys. Like, every year it kept winning, or was nominated all the time. But, like, you listen to the movie, like, oh, it's just crap sitcom that he just appeared on.
He didn't really, I think he did in real life, didn't like working on the show. So that might, because we're seeing from his eyes that it's a crap show.
I think in real life, it definitely was true that he had to be talked into it. But as is the case, a lot of talent has to be talked into things. People forget that Bill Murray had to be talked into doing Ghostbusters. He only did Ghostbusters for 2 reasons. 1, the money, and 2, Columbia said, if you make this movie, we will do The Razor's Edge. And that literally was his attitude. So, like, he had an I don't give a shit attitude in Ghostbusters, which helped the character. Yet it was just like, I'm getting to make the movie I really want to make afterwards, so I don't give a shit what I do in this take. And yet that helped perfect Peter Venkman. So it sort of was a happy accident.
Yeah.
But, I think Kaufman was at peace with the show in real life. But I've always been fascinated by what the actors on Taxi thought of him, because it must be a weird feeling to sit there and recreate moments of the show from, at this point, 20 years ago, circa 1998 or 99, early 99 when they're shooting it. How the movie makes, it's actually, I'm laughing thinking about this, how the movie makes no attempt at making some of the subject matters age appropriate. Like, okay, Lorne Michaels was not the executive producer of Saturday Night Live during the famous vote out of Andy Kaufman. That was the highly disliked, debatable Dick Ebersol, who actually did that. But yet the movie says Lorne Michaels. That's not the issue. That's the movie logic. And also they needed to get Lorne Michaels okay on all this stuff because, you're doing the name of Saturday Night Live. You got to get the okay. That's fine. What makes me laugh about the movie is the fact that Lorne Michaels just doesn't age in the movie. He's just like, that's how Lorne Michaels looked in 1999, and they just said, fuck it, he just looks that way.
Yeah,
especially with David Letterman. Apparently they tried to do a makeup on him, and David Letterman was like, I will do the movie because I love Andy, but you are not coming near me with makeup. I am going to look how I look now. I don't care. And no one seen him here back then. So I always laugh at stuff like that. There's one or two others. Also, the Taxi cast, they look visibly older. The only one who looks the same, ironically enough, is Christopher Lloyd. He just looks like, if you put him in the shots he's in Man on the Moon next to him from 78 to 1982, I would argue he probably looks very close.
Yeah.
As opposed to the great Judd Hirsch, who, I love Judd Hirsch. He's a fabulous actor. But, yeah, he's older. come on, he just doesn't look anything the same. Come on.
Well, and then you have the fact that Danny DeVito, who was in the cast of Taxi, playing an actual character in this movie, which is
or Shapiro,
which is also complicating the Taxi cast appearance part of it as well.
Which they said they considered it early on, and the feeling was this is not a Peter Sellers movie, so let's not bring attention to it. And I get that. So that's fine. Peter Sellers in the 60s, I guess it's 99, you'd say an Eddie Murphy movie.
Right.
I guess
there you go.
He was the only one doing it at the time. So, that's a decision that I get. Now, according to, they were not at the funeral. So it's weird that they're sitting there, when I see the reaction shots of them, it's weird. What are they thinking when they're doing the shot? And the one that always to me when I rewatched the movie was Carol Kane is
yes.
She just balls.
Yeah.
And that's for a second. And I feel like that's all they got out of her. And that looked genuine. Everyone, Christopher Lloyd looks out of, he looks spaced out. He looks like he's, playing Reverend Jim again in that moment at the funeral. And, but she absolutely lost it. Absolutely lost. I'm like, that doesn't look fake to me. That looks real.
Yeah, there's so many. That's the thing. There's so many levels to Jim playing Andy, recreating things with the actual people who had this contentious relationship with Andy, presumably, and according to the movie again, and then the people on set of this movie who have this relationship with Jim, who's supposedly channeling Andy. It gets really convoluted. But then the big question for this movie that I find interesting is, and George Shapiro even says this to Andy at one point, who are you trying to entertain, the audience or yourself? And it's like he's trying to come up with this new form of comedy, basically, for the time that isn't particularly accessible to the mainstream audience that knows him from Taxi. So I found that interesting, that him trying to find out how to channel that kind of manic energy and sort of trick the audience, but actually have them love him for it. And I think that the whole film is really his journey of trying to figure that out. And that's part of why I think it is kind of falling in line with a lot of the biopic tropes, but it also sheds a lot of the excess things that you would see in a normal biopic. We breeze pretty much right past his childhood, except for one scene.
Oh God.
And then later on, when his whole the Carnegie Hall thing is framed as basically him finding a way to be himself and also receive the audience love for it, with bringing on the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and bringing Santa Claus, and then he has the woman faker death, that whole.
He did. That stuff was all literally done, including Bob Zamuda dressed as a referee, woman dying and then being resurrected, the taking everyone out for milk and cookies. That all was what he did in 1979. So it was right at the peak of Taxi's success, and really his peak as a performer. I mean, obviously they're not going to go into, I'm sure that I'd love to see the deleted scene that's not on the DVD of where they go through heartbeats. Let's talk, or what was that movie? In God We Trust, his appearances in those movies. There was a brief period where they obviously tried to make Andy Kaufman into a movie star. Just did not work.
Right.
None of that's in the movie. They have to pick and choose. I think the big thing that I don't like about the movie is, and it's a conundrum of biopics, is the notion of mythologizing the character.
Mm-hmm.
That was my issue. You look at the Steve Jobs movie. That's completely there's so many silly lines in that movie. And you building up these characters to be bigger impacts in the world than they really were. No, Andy Kaufman at that time period was a guy who was in a hit sitcom that people really liked. And then he started doing these other things that people scratch their head and go, what the fuck is he doing? And some people thought, oh, I get it. He's doing this weird thing. It's really funny. I get it. And other people, it was 50-50, as they say in the movie. Some people think he's a genius. Some people think he's not funny anymore. That was the attitude at the time. His influence did not come till many years later after he died, which would have been something nice to put into the movie. But even in 1999, who would have taken on the throne of what Andy Kaufman did? I guess, actually, I just now realized this as I'm saying this, and which is another date and answer. I guess you'd say Tom Green? ?
Yeah, maybe.
You remember him?
Oh yeah.
He was huge in 99, and he was doing the Andy Kaufman thing. A year later, not so much. But in that moment, he's this weird guy from Canada who's pulling these stunts on regular people, usually in New York City, and you don't know if you're in on it. Is this an act? Is this real? Are the people in on it? Are they not? And then for a while, I guess you'd say Sacha Baron Cohen with the famous Borat.
I was just thinking of that. I think there's also maybe an alternate interpretation of this at the end of this movie too, where yes, there's is he still alive? But also, if it's not Bob Zmuda playing Tony Clifton, you assume that it's obviously someone else, and that maybe that he lives on. Sort of his legacy, his influence is maybe starting small and then trickling out from there to the point that we're now watching a film about his life. And I think that's
what it means.
I think it could go either way. There's a certain murkiness with it. Clearly they were trying to have you like, what do you think that means? Do you think is he still walking amongst us?
Honestly, that feels like a reshoot, and I don't know if it was or wasn't. I have a feeling that was not the original ending, and that they had another ending lined up, and that there was a feeling that we should probably end this on maybe not a upper note, but they had a different kind of way of ending the movie. Mm-hmm. That's my interpretation, because honestly, and I thought about this while I was rewatching it. When he says goodbye to the audience, I feel like that was supposed to be the ending. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe because it wraps around those two moments with, the fake movie, black and white. Yes, it is a friendly world. Thank you for all living in such a wonderful world. And goodbye. Credits. I feel like that. I mean, and I can't prove this. I don't know this. I feel like that was supposed to be the ending.
I actually think that would have been a much stronger ending in a way.
Yeah, and then you've already sort of learned to like the guy. You're going through this notions like, I don't know. You don't know what's going on. You don't know how you feel about the guy as a viewer watch the movie, and yet your heart starts to go out to him. I think the most moving moment, I tell you, the most moving moment in the movie is when he calls his father. They're launching the last episode, and he just sits there. He kind of gets his moment. He calls his dad up, and I get a little teary-eyed thinking about it. I'm a big crier during movies, and he just says, "Dad." That got to me. That's the moment you feel like, oh man, like what? Oh, that's kind of the moment for me that wins me over. There's a lot of great. I feel like a lot, aside from moments like that, I feel like a lot of the stuff was his personal life, maybe like the romantic subplot with Lynn, played by Courtney Love. I feel like those are sort of some of the shaggier parts of the movie. I feel like that's more of I feel like that's more of the biopic kind of, checking the boxes of what the genre requires as far as, because the real story is, as we were saying, is his relationship between him and the audience, not his relationship between him and the woman he happened to be dating. And I don't even know. Which in real life, they did not date that long, apparently.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying that, look, the moment I saw my wife, I knew she was the love of my life. I knew it. Like, I'm not saying it's not, but the movie certainly frames it that they were together for quite a few years. And again, that's a movie convention, and I understand it. And I would have made the same choice too, frankly. But yeah, in real life, they actually met. Like, he was shooting a movie with it was a spoof of I forgot what it's called. It was a spoof of My Dinner with Andre with a professional wrestler, and one of the extras was a woman who was this woman, this real life Lynn, and she was involved with the making of the movie. She did have participation in it. She did have a say, apparently, because someone's playing her. She has to sign off on all this stuff on her end. But Courtney Love was fine. Doesn't stand out like she did 3 years prior in The People vs. Larry Flint. But I think that was her first acting role. Or it might not have been her first, but it was an early one. So there was a feeling of, 2 years after the death of Kurt Cobain, everyone felt she was riding on his coattails. Can this girl do it? What is Milos Forman doing? And then she's like spectacular in that movie. She's fine. Everyone else is fine. I think the only other person who I would probably elevate to beyond fine status is Paul Giamatti.
Yeah, I was about to mention it.
And as a kid, I was like, I think the guy playing Buddha is great. Like, he's really good, and you can easily see these two guys being foils with one another. I like the stuff with them being pals. When the scene where he confessed that he has cancer, it's funny because like Zmuda's immediately laughing, going, "Okay, yeah, we can go with this. We can make this work. This is great." Like, immediately the way his mind works, like, I bought all that stuff.
Yeah, I did too. And this was when Paul Giamatti was very much of that guy. This was way before Sideways or Lady in the Water or whatever movies he had the lead role in. This was when he was popping up in things like The Negotiator and My Best Friend's Wedding for a scene, things like that. So this was, I think, a stepping stone for him as well.
He was still Pig Mom.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that relationship, that friendship, I think really is probably one of the most successful parts of the movie, especially in relation to Tony Clifton and that introduction scene for Bob Zamuda in the club where he's in on it. I loved all of that.
That is funny as hell. I laughed at my mom and I watched it when it first came out on home video. We laughed our asses off at it then. I laugh at it now. It was so fucking funny. And what sells it the most is George Shapiro's reaction. He's laughing because it's like one of ease, like, oh my God, thank God this poor guy was in on it. And the other's like, wait, is this for real? Like, he doesn't, it's nervous laughter. It's a combination. It's a really great moment on Danny DeVito's part. It's probably Danny DeVito's best moment in the movie.
And that's kind of his relationship with Andy in general. I mean, and when they have dinner the first time when he thinks he's from Lithuania and he takes him out to dinner when he drops the accent, obviously the foreign man routine, and he has like the little thing of like snot that he keeps moving from, that he moves from one nostril to the other, just kind of testing George Shapiro, I guess, to see how he's going to react. That's where he says the line, "You're insane, but you might also be brilliant," which is basically
which is the trailer Oscar moment that definitely made me roll my eyes. You know,
oh yeah,
you're insane. Camera pans in as you look through the camera, but you might also be like, I was like, oh come on, there's that line
for your consideration.
My mic just dropped. I was laughing. That was really good, sir. The one that always annoyed me, I don't know what does it annoy me, is during the Mighty Mouse bit. There's a girl who goes woo. That's apparently that's supposed to be his sister grown up.
Okay, nice.
That annoyed me. I was like, who's woohooing during this? Someone did that. Watch the real scene and like people are laughing, but again, it's like in real life, people like they're laughing because they're slowly getting the joke, and once it ends, then they get the joke. But in real life, it's like, you know, the first time he does it, explosion, silence, explosion, cheer. Like, it didn't happen that way. What are you talking about? Watch the real goddamn clip. But, you know, again, exaggerate for the movie, you know, mythologize it, blow it up bigger than what it was, fine.
And right from his first set in the movie, when he's on stage and he's doing the foreign man and he says he's going to do the impression of Jimmy Carter and he ends up using the same accent. So it's like eases them in, and they're like, wait a minute, is this just like a foreign guy that isn't good at this? And then when he does the Elvis impression, like pitch perfect, and everybody starts roaring, and then goes right back to the "thank you very much." That I love that whole scene. Is so perfect.
That's great. That is great. And what I wish they had done in the movie, the only slight thing I wish they'd done is in real life. Apparently, it got so extreme. He started crying because he was bombing. Like halfway through the act, and yeah, he's crying his eyes out. And there's these women with dates, and there's these guys who are laughing their asses off, and their dates are like hitting him, going, "If you keep laughing at that poor guy, I'm never going to see you again." And then he goes into the Elvis thing. So, like, I mean, they didn't shoot that, I doubt it, but like to hear that version of like, actually it got even worse. Like they had, you know, movie eyes that like not clean it up, but they had to like keep it very structured because you know, God, that's so funny.
His appearance on Fridays too, they really tightened that a lot. I actually looked up part of that clip.
Oh,
and that
my
scene
God.
goes on for quite a while.
In real life, oh my God. By the way, the real Bob Zamuda playing the executive producer showrunner who gets into a fight. So that was probably funny. I'm sure they were amused by it. That bit's really funny. And like the movie's suggestion that Kaufman's like, oh, it's not really a stunt. No, in real life, it really was a prank. Everyone was in on it. Like Michael Richards knew, which ironically enough, Michael Richards himself would 10 years later less than 10 years later, he would get super method as Kramer on Seinfeld. So, you know, either that rubbed off on him or he felt the same way as Andy Kaufman did when it came to performance art.
This film is, in a way, is very episodic because it's just focusing on Andy's different pranks that Andy kind of goes on and how those affect his overall journey. And then, like, as you mentioned, the Carnegie Hall thing is used as kind of the emotional turning point for him in the same way that Bohemian Rhapsody, which you mentioned, totally takes Live Aid out of its original context. And yeah, I'm not a fan of that film either, for a lot of the same reasons you mentioned. What did you think about like some of the other, I guess the big one being the wrestling subplot and how it's used in the film to bring in Lynn and the way that I guess builds his divisive relationship with his audience?
It was fine. I mean, I would love to know what people really thought back in that time period. If it really I kind of wonder if maybe that helped cause Taxi to go under. Like people just being so, he was the key to that show, him and Judd Hirsch. And did people just get so turned off? They're like, I'm not watching this guy anymore. I mean, we can point to some movies not doing well or some shows bombing because people have a disinterest in the actor. You know, we just saw a Harry Potter movie not do well, which is unheard of because Johnny Depp starred in it. Now, granted, there are extra components as to why Fantastic Beasts 2 underperformed. It would have underperformed with or without Depp, but it probably did even worse because Johnny Depp was in it. It was fine the way they handled Lynn stuff. And no issues with it. It's like, yeah, it's a biopic trope. Fine.
It's you get a look at a little bit of a different side of Andy too when he's talking to her, because in the movie it's portrayed that the whole marriage thing was just an excuse for Lawler to intervene, and she didn't know about it, which probably wasn't the case in real life. And that really kind of opens up for him being like, oh, you know, I didn't mean to. Sometimes I just get lost. That he just so focused on trying to please his audience and come up with something original. And he's, as the movie starts, he's talking to the club owner and saying about, he's telling him, Andy, it's not about art, it's about selling tickets, and that Andy's trying to crystallize his artistic vision. And I thought that's, as a creative person myself, that's the part of this character that I thought was really interesting. Like his struggle to stay one step ahead of the audience, but to do his whole kind of postmodern shtick, but also turning them around so they're on his side when all is said and done. I think that was an interesting balance that he's trying to strike.
Well, they also cut stuff out of the movie where, like, in real life, he did, in fact, like, him and Zamunda did this bit where he would do his bit and the audience was loving him, and Zamunda would like basically call him out in front of everybody to the point where saying, yeah, and this guy's so desperate, he paid me $500 to ruin this set for him, and then he runs after him. They get into a fight in front of people. That's he did that in real life. There's footage of it you can find on the internet. And by the way, it's in the movie, but they cut it out. Like, it's in the trailer. That's the other thing in this movie. It's so many shots in the movie or cut scenes are in the trailer, which always annoyed me and still kind of does to a degree. It is full of cut material. And Lord knows what else got cut that has not seen the light of day.
And his relationship with ABC with his special, and he wants to mess with the vertical lines, which they didn't really. That seemed also kind of like an aside that didn't really go anywhere. I guess
he did it, but that was real. But I think it did air. Like the movie's assertion that it never aired. It did air. You know, Taxi was actually canceled twice. In the movie, it suggests it was canceled once. Little details. You sort of lose dramatic effect by having two scenes which says Andy Taxi's canceled. So, okay, that's fine.
And then right as that happens, that's when he feels the lump on his back, of course, and all of that. So it kind of leads him into just when he feels like he's starting to figure himself out as an artist is when that whole thing happens, which is why the Carnegie Hall is such it all kind of, he finds his place, I guess, is the movie's statement on it. I don't really know. I mean, we already mentioned the ending. I loved his whole funeral scene, the friendly world thing and everything, and his the really positive message that it sounds. I didn't know Andy Kaufman in real life, but I like to think that was always kind of the good the place he was coming from. I don't know if that's representative of who he was as a person or not, but I like that the movie at least tries to create that image of him.
I think that's the thing the movie does the most. Carrey does the most successful as Kaufman is that there's that sort of child, not for lack of a better term, childlike innocence he has, childlike wonder that he brings to Kaufman that the real life Kaufman did have.
The film this film's success or failure rides on Jim Carrey's shoulders, as we mentioned. The film itself is flawed in places, but I'm glad that you picked it and gave me a chance to go back and watch it. I hadn't seen it in Oh man, probably at least maybe
20 years,
10
probably.
or maybe I actually was also one of the first DVDs that I got too, right around like in 2000 or so. So I've probably seen it a little bit here and there, like since then, maybe a few years later. But I mean, at least in the last decade or 15 years, I haven't really gone back to revisit it. And I think it's because at times it's kind of a frustrating watch for me, because you see him trying to do something and then it failing and then trying to, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's an interesting, it's a very unique take on a biopic that the film at least attempts, even if it doesn't always get there. And I think that what does work about it is like, as I was saying, really does come from Carrey and his commitment to this character and, you know, the personal connection that he feels with Andy Kaufman.
Yeah, the truth is, to quote William Goldman, nobody knows anything. Nobody really knows. I've seen certain movies that have, you know, failed or, you know, my point being, no one truly knows what movies will be remembered from this time period, from any year. There's no telling.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that, again, 1994, we had a year of Forrest Gump. And it's, you know, while yes, is the year of Forrest Gump, yes, it's the year of The Lion King, yes, it's the year of Pulp Fiction, movie that people remember the most from 1994 is The Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah. A
movie that was a financial disaster that nobody saw, and yet somehow became this bizarre word of mouth movie that really is it is our modern day It's a Wonderful Life. And with the notion of what's going on with streaming and stuff like that, might not ever happen again. Mm-hmm. But no one would have called that to be the movie remembered from 1994. Also a fantastic year at the movies. You can't tell. And this one's lost the shuffle of a very, very great year at the movies.
I would love to dig more into 1999 in the future. So did you have any other final thoughts on this film? I pretty much think we've covered a lot of it.
I think we covered all of them. It's funny just to look back at a movie it's the same movie. You know, like the same movie that I saw when I was 16 to now 35. And like, did the movie change or did I change? Well, the movie was always that way. I probably changed. That's my feeling about the Goonies. Like, you know, I loved that growing up. I don't like it now. It's not the movie's fault. I outgrew it. But my niece and nephew adore it. There's nothing wrong with people who are our age who say, I love the Goonies. I get it. I used to too. In the case of Man on the Moon, I adored it. I was obsessed with it. I grew up with it. I didn't grow up with it, but because I was an adolescent at that point. But I moved on. Just like, you know, as the movie that inspired my love of REM when I got into that band so religiously for the next years, I moved on with my life. I still love them, but I don't listen to them anymore because that's a different part of my life that I've moved past. I don't like the same stuff at 35 than I did when I was 16 or 17 or 18. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, I totally agree. And some of the stuff that I grew up with, I still love, even if only for nostalgic purposes. But it is, you know, I think that's part of the fun of doing this podcast and having the chance to go revisit films that I've seen before, or, you know, see films that I'd missed over the years, and you know, kind of expand your cultural horizons one movie at a time. And I think so this is a good opportunity to go back and watch a movie and celebrate its 20th anniversary and have a little bit of a larger discussion on that year in cinema.
Yes, it was. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Did you where can people find you on social media?
Oh Lord, just you can go on Twitter at FilmNerdJamie and listen to my random pointless thoughts on films and whatever else, but mostly film. Well,
you know, we could always have another conversation. I'd love to have you back at some point.
Thank you. I will come back anytime you request. Thank you, sir.
If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.